So you've just bought yourself the DJI Avata 2, but you're overwhelmed by all the different menus and settings and all different things that you can use this drone for. This video has got the 34 must-know tips and tricks for the DJI Avata 2. What's going on, guys? My name is Dan Davis and I'm a creative director here on DansTube.TV. I can't wait to show you guys all of these exciting new tips and tricks for the DJI Avata 2. If you are new into the drone space and you want to learn more about your drone and how to become a fearless drone pilot, check out my drone course, Fearless Drone Academy. I will have a link below. You can use the code at DansTube to save 10% over there. It is the ultimate online drone course for beginners and it's well worth your time. Let's jump into these tips and tricks. The first one I'm going to show you is on the DJI Goggles 3, and it is the little knobs underneath the goggles themselves. The cool thing about this is that you can actually adjust the width of the lenses depending on obviously the way that your face is designed. And you can also adjust by twisting the knobs, the focus point for each eye. So if you've got one eye that's a little bit worse than the other, you can adjust that manually. But I wanted to show you that what you can do is you can actually lock them into place so that when they're in the bag, they don't get moved like this. So you see how I can move it like so? Basically, the functionality is you slide it left or right for the width, then you twist depending on the focal length that you want. And then what you do is you kind of push down and then twist, and that will lock it in place there. So now it can't move anymore. You can twist it to really get that tight position. And now that is not going to move at all. So you'll see the difference. This one is loose and it will just move around. So you could get knocked very easily in your bag, where this one is solid. I can't move it anymore. So just keep that in mind. You can lock the focus knobs on the Goggles 3. Tip number 2 is still on the DJI Goggles 3. So first things first, make sure that you've got the antennas pushed up if you're getting ready to fly. And then what you really need to get used to is these buttons here. So you have a joystick here, which is a 5D button. So you can push it down to select and you can go left, right, up and down. And then there's also a back button. So once that's on your head, you really need to get used to maneuvering that, because that's how you're going to interact with the menu system while the drone's flying. While the drone's on the ground, it's pretty easy to do it with the motion controller. You can pull off to one side and select the menu and whatnot. But I find that when you're flying, it's a lot easier to just do it on the goggles. So get used to these little options here, the 5D joystick and then the back button as well. I'm now going to power everything on and I'll show you some of the more advanced tips and tricks through the menu. Like I was mentioning before, I can use the RC Motion 3 to maneuver between all the different interfaces that you can see here. So just a tap of the trigger when I reach each point is how I can access each different menu here. But I find that once the drone has launched and once you're controlling it, that's where you really want to use the buttons on the headset themselves, on the goggles. It makes it a little bit easier. But in this little section here, when the drone is grounded and just sitting there, you can go between the menus like so, just by navigating up to the top, the left, or the bottom down here, and then just pressing the trigger on the controller. For tip number 3, I'm going to access this top menu up here. So once I press this top menu, you can see I've got the option to record, which I'm already doing. You can see the red icon there, and you can also see it off to the side here. So that's how you can record if you want to record just from this menu, for example, and not have to press on the controller. Then we've got this one here, which is the enhanced display. So when I tap on it, you'll see that it kind of just pops the saturation. You can see the colors on my shirt really pop there. My arms look a little bit brighter almost. The pillows on the couch look a little brighter. So that's if you really want to enhance the display. You have that option there, which is very simple. So tip number 3 is the record and the enhanced display options here. For tip number 4, we have the head tracking feature here. Now this is an awesome one. I love this with the original Avata 1, and it's made a grand entrance onto the Avata 2. So basically what happens is once the drone has launched off, I can actually look in a direction and the drone is going to go in that direction basically. Okay, so let me quickly show you this one because this is a little bit tricky while I'm inside. But this is the head tracking feature. So straight while I enable it, I can now look in whatever direction I want and the drone is going to move in that direction. So I can look up to move the camera up and down. And I can also obviously look left and right to angle the direction of the drone just based on my head movement. So that's a really awesome feature. That's a lot of fun to use. This is another bonus tip, and it's basically how you can hand catch the drone. So I'm just going to have my hand underneath the drone and I'm going to press and hold the orange button and it's going to go into its landing mode. So you just got to kind of cover the sensor underneath the drone with your palm and then press and hold the orange button and it will land on you. Tip number 5 is in the same section up here. So we checked out the head tracking, and tip number 5 is share live view to mobile device via Wi-Fi. So once you tap on that, it actually talks you through how to do it. If someone's with you and they want to see what you're seeing, then they can connect up via Wi-Fi. The other option is you can plug in a cable into the actual headset, have that running to a mobile device, and then they can see the same experience basically, but from a wired connection. Tip number 6 is one of the big calling cards of the Avata 2, and it is this easy Acro mode. And this is how you enable it here. And it's not going to work while I'm recording. So let me just stop recording and then I'll enable it. I've now enabled the easy Acro mode right here. And we can see I've got a few different options now. So I've got slide, 180-degree drift, and flip. Now, all I have to do to switch between these is I use this little toggle on the side here to just toggle between them. I believe I have to actually be in the air. So we'll show you some footage now of what it looks like to switch between the modes. But you can also adjust the tilt of the drone itself with this toggle wheel on the side here. But also once you're flying, for example, you can switch between these 3 different modes here as well. Tip number 7 is a handy one. We're still going to this top menu here, and it is the Goggles Defog. Now, I actually need this right now because the goggles are fogged up, but I can press this. I can hear the fans kick in and they just defog the lenses for me and defog the goggles. It does a really good job actually. And once you're ready to disable it, you tap it again and you'll hear the fans basically disengage. So that's a really awesome option and something that you really need to be prepared to go into if you're fogging up the goggles. The only other option in here is for your brightness. So press and hold that and then you drag either to the left or to the right to adjust the brightness. This just depends on your preference and how you're feeling basically. Like that midpoint is fine most of the time, but if you want it to be a little brighter, you can do that as well. For tip number 8, I'm going to show you how you can change between different aircraft. So on the left-hand side here, we've got a new menu, the left menu, whatever you want to call it. You tap on that, and then there is the status option. So right now I'm connected up to the DJI Avata 2, but if I click on the switch option, I've either got the DJI Air 3 or the Mini 4 Pro that I can switch between. So if you want to connect with those, that's basically how you start the process. I'll have a whole nother video on the channel to show you that entire process, but this is the basics of how to change the aircraft that you've got connected up. For tip number 9, we're going to go into the settings here. You do have the album option where you can view all the different captures on your drone. You got the transmission option, which is for broadcasting and a few other things, but we're just going to jump straight into the settings and go into the safety menu. And this is where you have a few options that I would suggest playing around with, especially if this is your first time flying a drone or an FPV drone for that matter. You can adjust the flight altitude and the max flight distance. So you can kind of keep it in a bubble. You could make it, for example, like 40 meters or 20 meters for everything. And then that just means you can make it 20 meters and 20 meters. So that means in a 20-meter radius as such, like in a dome, the drone can fly to geo-fence walls and then it won't fly any further. So that's really good for safety if you're practicing in like a nice open field, no one's around. Really good opportunity to get used to it in a controlled environment. The return to home altitude, I would suggest increasing that. That means that when it's returning to home, it's going to go to 30 meters and then return to home. But some trees, buildings, and whatever else are over 30 meters. So I would always suggest anywhere from 80 meters to 100 meters just for safety purposes. 80 will be fine in most situations. Tip number 10 is to do with all of the different calibration options here. So you can see that everything is saying normal. So you can come in here and just have a quick look to make sure that everything is normal. It would typically give you a warning message down here if there's any sort of issue, but this is how you can change a few different things. So, or calibrate a few different options. So you could jump in here and then you got the option to calibrate your drone, for example. You can go back and go into the aircraft IMU, you can calibrate that. Same with the goggles, and you've got 2 options for the goggles there. So just jump in here if you're having any issues. I would suggest calibrating all 4 of these. For tip number 11, we have got the camera view before loss, which is this one here. This is actually a very handy feature. It's not going to let me show it purely because we're recording right now, but what will happen is it will show you like a 30-second clip before you lost the drone. So for example, if you've had an issue where you've lost the drone, I can't even view the album because everything's recording right now, but that's where you can view it. You go into the safety tab, you scroll down, and then there's camera view before loss. Very handy because it will give you that 30-second clip before you lost the drone, and it will give you a rough idea of where to look if you can't find it. Moving on to tip number 12, and it is this, ESC beeping. So again, if you've lost the drone and you're getting close to it, you can see roughly from the previous setting, which is before loss, you can see roughly where it is, but you still can't find it. I would suggest tapping on this, and you will hear a very loud beeping sound, and it will just keep beeping incrementally just to let you know where the drone is if you're trying to find it but you can't see it. So that's a really handy one as well. Tip number 13 is in the advanced safety settings. So if I tap on this, we've got a few different options here. So you've got aircraft signal lost action. So this means when it loses the signal, what's it going to do? Is it going to hover, land, or return to home? I would suggest just coming in here and making sure that it's set to return to home. Landing is not phenomenal, obviously, because it could land somewhere you don't know where it is. And hovering isn't ideal if you've completely lost that signal. So just make sure that it's on return to home, which it should be. And then just make sure that this hasn't been tapped, because if you enable this, you'll see press lock button 4 times to stop propellers in an emergency during flight. Now you can enable this if you really want, but you just don't want to accidentally do it. So just make sure that both of these settings are the way that you can see them on the screen right now. We're now going to move into the control menu. So we're just going to go back to the settings and we're going to go into the control menu now. And this is where you can adjust the motion controller. So you can see I'm using the RC Motion 3. Over here I can adjust which hand I've got set up, the right hand or left hand. And you can also go back in here to see some of the settings of how to actually use the controller, which is handy obviously. And then on top here, we've got gain tuning and we've got RC calibration. So this is where you can calibrate the RC and where you can view, how it's going. Everything's normal again, but we can come in here to calibrate. I would suggest going into gain tuning though, because this gives you even more control over the flight experience. So you can see in normal mode, it is different to sports mode. So sports mode increases the forward speed up to 16 meters per second. In normal mode, it's 8 meters per second. So it doubles the speed there. But you can tap on these and you can customize them however you want to. You've got the max backward speed as well. You can increase that significantly if you want to fly faster going backwards. So there's a bunch of cool options in here. The lateral flight speed as well as the vertical speed. So just come in here, play around with a few of them and fly the drone for a little bit, because you can always just reset it back to factory once you've played around with it, just to figure out what works for you. Tip number 15 is the gimbal pitch speed. This is basically how you can adjust the speed of the pitch, right? The gimbal pitch. So if we make it slow, for example, and we go back, that means that as I'm scrolling on this little toggle here, it's going to be very, very slow, right? Now, by default, it's just on, I think it's normal, but let's just put it into fast just to show you the difference. So this is now fast, and you can see it's a lot more jarring. It's a lot faster. So it depends on what you're looking for here. Maybe you want a slower, more gradual cinematic look. Maybe you're happy with the medium, or the fast is something you're looking for. Just have a look in controller and then gimbal pitch speed. I find normal to be fine in most situations, but if you want it to be a bit slower, then definitely enable the slow option. We're now going to check out tip number 16, which is the turtle mode. And what this basically means is if the drone is flipped upside down, you can get the drone to flip upright. So let me just put it on the ground and I'll show you what it does. So you can see in the camera feed that everything is upside down right now. So I'm just going to click on the turtle mode. Ooh, nearly flipped on my foot. There we go. So it's as simple as that to flip using the turtle mode through the settings. In control and then turtle mode. Tip number 17, we're still in the control menu, and this is the beginner mode. So if you are a beginner, if you're starting out, I would definitely suggest turning on the beginner mode. You can see in the bottom right corner, it says beginner mode. And this just makes everything a lot slower, a lot more manageable, and well worth it if you're just starting out with this drone. Just take your time with it and get used to it. The beginner mode is going to help you out a lot. We're now going to go into the camera menu, and this is tip number 18. So if we go back into the settings, go into camera, we've got a bunch of different options here. Now it's going to be hard to show you some of these because I am recording the screen, but this is where you can adjust the aspect ratio, which is always handy. But the one I want to show you is the video quality option. So you can tap on that, which I can't right now, and it'll give you all the different video quality options you have, all the different frame rates, as well as resolutions. So this is well worth looking into and playing around with. Tip number 19 is just below it, which is the camera field of view. And this one's a handy one. You can go in here and you can adjust the field of view. So right now we're in ultra wide. I'm just going to stop recording and I'm going to change it for you to show you what it looks like. So I've now gone into normal, which you can see here. There is the option for ultra wide, wide, or normal. And I've just changed it into normal just to change that field of view there. If you want it to be even wider though, go with the ultra wide. By default, I think it is on normal, I'd imagine, but the ultra wide makes it even wider again. Tip number 20, and this is the electronic image stabilization. This is a handy one to play around with. So you go back into camera and we've got EIS. So by default, for me, I've got it on rock steady, which is the stabilization technology. You can adjust it into horizon steady in here, as well as turn it off altogether if you want. And that is a handy setting to know. I prefer rock steady, but if you want the horizon to be smack bang steady, you can go in here, select that, and then change it to horizon steady. Tip number 21, still in the camera settings here, and this is the Gridlines. So I personally like having these, so this is the one that I would probably go with in most scenarios. So once this is enabled, you will get these Gridlines here, so it makes it easier to frame up your shot. You don't have to have them on, and not everyone loves it, but it can be a nice one. You can adjust into a few different ones as well, or you can just leave it off, which it is by default. And then for the next tip, it is the center point here. So this should be turned on by default, but if it's not, I would suggest turning that on because it just gives you this center point smack bang here in the middle. And it's just a great reference point, especially while you're flying FPV. And if you're using this controller here, just makes it nice and easy to control everything. And another quick bonus mention is using this button on the side of the RC Motion 3. So you can tap that once and it's going to reset the focus point right into the middle of the actual motion controller. So I could be over here, tap it once and it's going to try to recenter it for me, which is very handy if you're noticing the drone isn't maneuvering the way that you think it should be. Just press that button once and it will reset it back to where your hand is holding it in that position. Tip number 23, and as we keep scrolling down, you can just use the joystick to keep scrolling down, or obviously you can use the headset here, which I suggested right at the beginning. So we can go down here to format. It's not gonna let us because we're recording right now, but this is how you format the cards. You can format the internal storage, the micro SD card in the goggles, and the micro SD card in the drone if you've got them connected. So for me, I can format 3 different options when I go into the format menu here. Tip number 24 is in the advanced camera settings. So once we tap on here, we have got a bunch of different options in here. So we can change if we want to record with both, which would be the goggles and the drone. I leave it on both because I'm doing a lot of tutorial videos, but maybe you only want it on the drone, for example, you can change that there. Camera view recording is something that I have enabled and it's set by default, but this is the option here. If you want to auto record on takeoff, maybe you want to take off from like a cliff face and you just want to record instantly, you don't want to worry about missing that recording. This is a handy one because it's going to record immediately and you can get straight into the action without worrying about it. So you can just enable that like so, or disable it if you don't want it. The next tip is in the color menu here, or the color settings. You've got 2 options. You've got normal, which is on by default, or D-Log M, which is going to be a flatter profile, a lot more information in the video, and it's going to help you out in that post-production workflow. So this is the one for the professionals that really want to push their drone to its limit. D-Log M is well worth it. Tip number 26, and this is a combined one. It's just below the color option. I can't change it again because we are recording, but you can adjust the sharpness and the noise reduction in here. So you've got some options here, some control to adjust sharpness and noise reduction. Pretty easy to do. You just come in here, select it, and then you can adjust between the sharpness and the noise reduction, and you can just go with whatever seems to work for you on that particular day, or maybe you've got a default that works for you, but you do have a little bit more customization options through the advanced camera settings. Tip number 27 is in the display menu. So we tap on this, got a few different options in here, but the few that I want to show you are down the bottom here. You can adjust your brightness in here, your home point, and a few other things, but this is how you enable the goggles defog, which I showed you right at the beginning in that initial menu. But you can still enable it here. You'll hear that fan kick in and it will start to clear up the goggles for you. Very, very handy to enable that. And then down here, I don't know if this is actually gonna work to show you how it actually works, but the enable real view picture-in-picture is an awesome one. So once this is enabled, you've got 2 different ways of interacting with that picture-in-picture view, which it might not show us here. It has not showed me in the past when I've recorded my screen. But you've got 2 options. You can either tap twice on the side screen here, and hopefully this is showing it. I don't know if it is, but you can see my 2 lights. You can see the Osmo Pocket 3, and then in the top left corner, you can see the feed from the drone. So that's one way of enabling it. You tap that twice, which I don't think it recorded that because it started the recording again. Or the other option is on this side toggle here, you can press that twice, and again, it will take you in to that picture-in-picture, which for whatever reason is not working. It's not recording it to the goggles, but that's fine. You know, it's just started the recording again, as we can see here. Tip number 29 is in the settings, and it's in the about section here. So this is where you can just see the aircraft firmware firmware for the goggles, and just to kind of see where you're up to. It also gives you the information on your battery cycle count, which is very handy to know how many times you've cycled out the batteries. You've got a few other options down here, a few other things. You can reset everything, clear all your data, but this is just handy to know what firmware you're up to and also how many battery cycles you've gone through. So for tip number 30, it's down in this bottom menu down here. So we've got the top menu, the left menu, and the bottom menu, and you can control these with the goggles as well. So you can go in the direction, so either up will bring up the bottom menu, down will bring the top menu down, or right will bring the left menu across. So you can do it either way, but down the bottom here, this is where you can adjust a few different settings. You can see we've got the option here to go into the photo or the video mode, which is very handy. I would highly suggest playing around with the photo options as well. So that's a handy way to just go in, and it seems to be the only way to enable the photo option, oddly enough, but that's how you do it. Down from that bottom menu, and then you tap on that if you're not recording, and it will swap into the photo mode. Tip number 31, and it's down here. Again, one of the only spots that you can find it in the goggles interface, but this is where you can enable the manual mode. So if you tap on that, it will bring up the manual option, and then you can adjust all these settings and get even more out of the drone. If you want to leave it in auto, it does a fine job on its own, but if you go into manual, you're going to get even more control over the settings here. Tip number 32 is how you can adjust all of the different camera settings. So I showed you in the camera menu how to do it, but this is a lot easier if you're flying, because then you're going to have a lot more of a clearer view from the drone itself, because obviously it's a smaller menu down the base, but you just use your joystick and you can just like navigate left and right between them. But this is how you would change, again, your field of view if you want it to be in wide, the video quality, aspect ratio. You've got a bunch of different options in here, and that's how you can change it all through here. You also have the option to change the electronic image stabilization, which is where you can go into the horizon steady, and then you've got the color option here, so you can go from normal to that D-Log M as well. So a bunch of options, and that's just from this bottom menu down here. Tap on that, and then you can just almost swipe across and see all the different options you have at a glance. A few bonus tips here. So this is tip number 33, and this is the emergency brake. So it's this, the button here, it's kind of got like a grippy feel to it. So that's the emergency brake button. As long as you're holding the control like that, which feels quite natural, you can accelerate with the trigger on the back, and let's say you get really close to something, your finger or your thumb just sits perfectly over the grippy button, press that, and it's gonna chuck it straight into the emergency brake mode, which you'll see right now as I'm flying and then pressing that brake. It just instantly happens, and it does an awesome job. And the final tip, tip number 34 here, and it's with the trigger on the controller here. So as you would imagine, you pull that trigger down to accelerate, and if you push away like so, you can brake. So let's say you're flying around and you want to slow down a bit, you can kind of angle it away from you a bit just to slow down, continue to accelerate, push it away to brake and slow down. You have a lot more control than you would imagine with this controller here, with the RC Motion 3. So just get used to the feeling of accelerating and then putting the brake on and almost pulling back a little bit. Very handy, and if you feel like you got so much more control over the drone. Whew. Okay, so that was a long video, but they are my 34 must-know tips and tricks for the DJI Avata 2. I appreciate all of the support, everyone, and I will chat to you in the next one. Peace.